Welcome to Relative, our family mess. Here, I bring you the raw, unspoken stories of older men betrayed by the very families they spent a lifetime protecting, and the dark secrets hidden within the modern home. Now, here is today's story. 12 years ago, an avalanche took my daughter on Maroon Peak. We never found her body. I buried an empty casket and a piece of myself with it. So when a woman with Anastasia's face knocked on my door at midnight in the worst blizzard in a decade, I felt my heart break open all over again. Still, I noticed her hands, and I knew this woman was not my daughter. The snowstorm had been hammering the valley for 3 days when the knock came. I am 67 years old, and I had long since stopped expecting anything from a door at midnight except the wind. I had built an empire on the side of these mountains, Blanchard Alpine Resorts, the towers in Denver, the name carved into the deeds of half this county, and not 1 inch of it had ever given me back the only thing the mountain had taken. I almost didn't answer. The storm had knocked the power out twice that evening, and I had been sitting alone in the study with a single candle and a glass of bourbon I hadn't touched, listening to the wind try to peel the roof off the house. Then it came again, 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. The sound of a knuckle that knew exactly where the door was. Sable lifted his head from the hearth. My old dog, gray in the muzzle now, had not barked at a stranger in years. He did not bark now. He growled, low in his chest, and backed away from the door instead of toward it. I should have listened to him then. Animals know things before we let ourselves know them. I opened the door, and the cold came in like a blade. And standing on my porch in a thin coat dusted white was a woman who should have been dead for 12 years. She had Anastasia's eyes, the same pale gray, the color of glacier ice in the late afternoon. She had the chipped front tooth, the one my daughter had broken at 9 years old, falling off the porch swing. She had the comma-shaped birthmark at the wrist, the one I had kissed 1,000 times when she was small. The snow was melting in her dark hair, and she looked up at me with tears already standing in her eyes. And she said the word that had lived in the deepest room of my heart for 12 years. Dad, I want to tell you that I knew at once. I want to tell you that a father's instinct is incorruptible, that no surgeon's knife and no coached performance could ever fool the man who had held her on the day she was born. But I would be lying, and I've done too much lying to myself already. For one terrible, beautiful moment, I believed. My knees nearly went. My hand found the doorframe. 12 years of grief, 12 years of empty chairs and unspoken birthdays rose up in my throat all at once, and I almost opened my arms. And then I noticed her hands. She had reached up to wipe her eyes, and her left hand had gone to the ring. She wore a thin gold band, identical to the one Anastasia had worn since her mother gave it to her at 16. My daughter had a habit, a thing she did without thinking whenever she was nervous or moved or afraid. She turned that ring 3 times on her finger. 3. Always 3. I had watched her do it before every exam, before her mother's funeral, before she walked out the door that last morning to climb the mountain that took her. This woman turned it once, then she stopped, as if she'd forgotten the rest, as if she'd been taught the gesture but not its rhythm. It was such a small thing, a single turn instead of 3, in the roar of that blizzard, with my heart breaking open and my eyes blurred and every cell in my body begging me to believe. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to miss. But I have spent my life reading the small, wrong things. It is how I built everything I own. A man's eyes when he quotes a price. The half-second pause before a partner says, "Of course." The detail that doesn't fit. The note that's slightly flat. The truth, I have learned, almost never announces itself. It hides in the gesture nobody thought to rehearse. I looked at this woman wearing my daughter's face, and the grief in my chest went cold and still and clear as winter air. "Come in," I said gently, and I smiled, and I stepped back to let her cross my threshold. "You must be freezing. Let me get you warm." She smiled back, relieved, and walked into my home. She thought she had just fooled a heartbroken old man. She had no idea she had just walked into the only room in the world where every word she spoke would be weighed and measured and remembered. "Whoever sent you," I thought, watching her shake the snow from her coat by my fire. "I am going to find you, and I am going to take back everything you came here to steal." Let me tell you what grief does to a man like me, so you understand why I did not break down on that doorstep and weep with joy. Grief makes you a target. The people who knew me, who had watched me bury my wife and then my daughter, all believed the same thing. They believed that under the suits and the deals and the cold arithmetic, there was a soft, ruined old man waiting for the right miracle to undo him. They were not entirely wrong, but they made one mistake. They thought the soft part and the sharp part were two different men. They never were. They are the same man. And that man was now standing in his kitchen, filling a kettle with steady hands, while a stranger wearing his daughter's face warmed herself by his fire. The secret to surviving 40 years in my business was never being smarter than the other side. The secret was letting them believe I felt exactly what they needed me to feel, so I felt it. I let my shoulders soften and my voice catch. I carried 2 cups of tea into the great room, set one in her cold hands, and sat across from her like a father handed back the only thing he ever wanted. "I thought I'd lost you forever," I said. The words were true. They were only aimed at the wrong woman. "I almost didn't come," she said. "I was afraid you wouldn't believe me." "Why wouldn't I believe you? You're my daughter." She looked into the tea, gathered herself, and began to talk. A hospital, no memory, a fishing boat, a head injury, years lost in fog. The story was good. Careful, tearful, full of the right gaps for a desperate father to fill himself. Whoever wrote it understood people almost as well as I did. That was the first thing that frightened me. Not the surgery, though the surgery was a marvel. The birthmark alone would have cost a fortune to forge. What frightened me was the script. She knew things. She knew about the old tire swing behind the guest cabin. She knew the name of the pony we boarded one summer in Carbondale. She knew I take my coffee black and my insults personally. These are not things you learn from an obituary. These are things you learn from inside a family. Somebody close to me had handed this woman the private architecture of my life, room by room, memory by memory. And the list of people who possessed that kind of access, who had sat at my table and knelt at my wife's grave, was very short. But she made mistakes too. They always do. The better the performance, the more rehearsal it took. And the more rehearsal, the more there was to hide. She called me father once, late in the story, when her guard slipped. Anastasia had never once called me father in 34 years. It was always dad, sometimes the old man when she teased me. Never father. That word belonged to a script, not a daughter. And then there was Sable. My old shepherd had loved Anastasia past all reason. When she was alive, that dog lost his mind with joy at the sound of her boots. Now Sable lay by the cold hearth, grey muzzle on his paws, watching the woman on my sofa with his ears flat and his body still. He did not go to her. He did not wag. He simply watched, the way an old soldier watches a stranger standing too close to something he was sworn to protect. Dogs do not read scripts. They read blood and scent, and the 1,000 small truths no surgeon can carve into a face. I made my decision somewhere in the second cup of tea. The way I have made every important decision of my life. Coldly, completely, with the ending already in mind. I would not confront her. A confrontation would tell whoever sent her that the old man was awake, and they would pull her back into the dark and try again from a smarter angle. No. I would do the harder thing. I would welcome her. I would smile and grieve and play the broken, grateful father so convincingly that the people behind her would relax and lean in and reach for the prize. And while they reached, I would follow this thread back through every hand that touched it, all the way to the center. "You must be exhausted," I said, rising. "Your room is exactly how you left it. I never had the heart to change it." That part was true, and it cost me to say it. I led her up the stairs and down the long hall to the door at the end, the one I had not opened in years, and I let her step into the small museum I had built out of my grief. 12 years of dust and preserved childhood. She turned in a slow circle, and again I saw that careful, studying hunger move across her face, that look of someone confirming a map against the territory. "Good night, sweetheart," I said. "Good night, Dad," she answered. I went back downstairs, sat in the dark beside my old dog and the dying fire, and let the warm, foolish, grateful father drain out of me, until only the other man was left. They thought my grief had made me weak. They thought they had found the soft place to drive the knife. What they had actually done was hand me a single loose thread. And I've spent my whole life pulling threads exactly like this one, slowly and patiently, until whole empires came apart in my hands. The storm broke just before dawn, and I got up and cooked my dead daughter's favorite breakfast for the woman pretending to be her. There is a particular cruelty in that act, and I felt every ounce of it. I stood at the stove in the grey morning light, the windows white with frost, and the valley below buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. And I made cinnamon roll pancakes from the recipe Anastasia's mother had taught her, the one stained and curling in the binder I kept by the bread box. Brown sugar, real butter, a heavy dusting of ground cinnamon, folded into the batter until the whole kitchen smelled the way Sunday mornings used to smell, when this house still had a family in it. I was not cooking breakfast. I want to be clear about that. I was setting a trap, and the trap was made of cinnamon. Because here is the thing the surgeons and the coaches and whoever wrote that careful little script could never have known. Anastasia could not eat cinnamon. Not a pinch of it. When she was 11, she ate a single churro at the county fair, and we spent 4 hours in the emergency room in Glenwood Springs, while her throat closed and a young doctor drove epinephrine into her thigh. After that, cinnamon was a banned word in my house. I read every label. I interrogated every waiter. For 20 years, I treated that brown spice like a loaded gun. Because to my daughter, that is exactly what it was. The woman came down at 7:15, wearing one of Anastasia's old sweaters that I had kept folded in the cedar chest, her hair damp from the shower. She crossed the kitchen and sat at the table in the chair by the window, the chair Anastasia had claimed since she was a child, the one that looked out over the slope where the chairlifts hung motionless in the cold. She sat in it without hesitation. Of course she did. They had taught her well. "It smells incredible in here," she said, and she closed her eyes and breathed it in. And she smiled, the kind of warm, wounded smile that would have broken a lesser man in two. "Oh my God, is that what I think it is?" "Your favorite," I said. I slid the plate in front of her, golden and steaming and dusted with enough cinnamon to put a child in the hospital. "I haven't made these since..." I let the sentence trail off and watched her fill the silence herself. "Since I left," she said softly. "Since you left." I poured 2 cups of black coffee and sat across from her. And I made myself eat, slow and unhurried. and I watched her over the rim of my cup with the flat attention I would give a man across a negotiating table. She picked up her fork. She cut a corner off the stack. She lifted it to her mouth, and she ate it. She ate the whole thing. She praised it between bites. She told me it tasted exactly the way she remembered, that she had dreamed about these pancakes on cold nights at sea, that no breakfast in 12 years had come close. She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, and it might even have been real, because by then some part of her may have understood that she was eating something she should not, that a line had been crossed, even if she did not yet know what it was. My real daughter could not have taken a single bite. My real daughter, smelling that much cinnamon from the bottom of the stairs, would have backed out of the room with her hand over her mouth. This woman cleaned her plate and asked if there was more. I told her, of course. And I served her a second helping, and I smiled and refilled her coffee. And somewhere behind my ribs, the last thing that had been hoping against all reason finally went quiet and cold. That was when Sable made his judgment. My old shepherd had spent the night by the dead fire, and now he came clicking slowly across the tile, drawn out by the smell of butter and the sound of voices. The woman saw him, and her whole face lit up, and she set down her fork and leaned toward him with her hand out low and open, the way you greet a dog you have loved your whole life. "Sable," she said warmly. "Hey, baby. Do you remember me?" He stopped 4 feet from her chair. I watched it happen in real time, the thing no scalpel and no coaching session can defeat. The hackles rose in a slow ridge down his spine. His ears flattened. He did not growl. He simply stood and stared at the stranger holding out my daughter's hand, then turned and walked away, his nails ticking across the tile, and lay back down in the cold ashes of the hearth, where he could watch her from a safe distance. She laughed lightly and said something about how he had gotten old, how dogs forget. I agreed. I said age does that to all of us, but I have lived with that animal for 11 years, and I knew exactly what I had just watched. Anastasia had been that dog's whole world. If my daughter had walked through that door last night, Sable would have wept and howled and knocked her flat with joy. He would not have retreated to the ashes to watch her like a threat. Dogs do not lie. They cannot be rehearsed or paid or talked into believing something they can smell. And Sable, lying in the cold gray morning with his eyes fixed on the woman eating poison off my daughter's plate, had just told me the last thing I needed to hear. So I cleared the dishes, told her to rest and settle in, and went down the hall to my study and closed the door. Then I took out the phone I kept locked in the bottom drawer, the one with no name attached, and scrolled to the only man left alive I trusted completely. It was time to call Mitchell Carr. Mitchell Carr answered on the second ring, the way he had for 30 years, with no hello and no wasted breath. "You don't call this number unless something's broken," he said. "What's broken?" "I need you at the house. Today. Come up the service road and park in the lower garage where she can't see the car." There was a short silence, the kind a man only earns after 3 decades. "She," Mitchell repeated. "Who's she, Martin?" "My daughter just came home," I said. Except she didn't. He did not ask me to explain. He said he would be there by noon, and he hung up. That was Mitchell. 26 years in the bureau, the last 9 running field offices. Then a quiet retirement into private work, the people who needed help that did not come with a press release. He had stood beside me at my wife's funeral, and again at the empty grave we dug for Anastasia. And he was the only man left who had seen me at the bottom, and never once used it against me. He came up the back stairs at 12:15, snow on his shoulders. I poured coffee in the study and locked the door, then told him everything, the way I would walk aboard through a hostile acquisition. Cleanly. In order. without emotion. I could not afford. The knock at midnight. The face perfect down to the chipped tooth and the birthmark below the ear. The embrace that lacked the one ritual no surgeon could have known. The 3 slow turns of her mother's ring. The word father, where there should have been dad. The cinnamon she should never have touched, eaten clean off the plate and praised between bites. And Sable, who had loved my daughter past all reason, retreating to the ashes to watch her like an intruder. Mitchell listened without interrupting, his coffee going cold, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he was quiet a long moment. "You're certain," he said. It was not a question. I held her. Mitchell. My body knew before my mind did. He nodded slowly and set the cup down. Then let me tell you what you're looking at, because I've seen this twice, and both times it ended in a federal courtroom. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The face you're describing isn't a lucky resemblance, a birthmark, a chipped tooth, the exact set of the eyes. That's not a con artist who happened to look the part. That's reconstructive surgery. Months of it, maybe years. Multiple procedures, paid in a way that leaves no insurance trail. You don't build a face like that on a hunch. You build it because you already know the payoff is worth a fortune. An empire's worth, I said. An empire's worth. He let it settle. Amateurs work the surface. They get the haircut right and the story memorized, and hope nobody looks close. Professionals know the surface is the easy part. The real deception lives in the small things. The habits, the reflexes a person can't rehearse. And here's what should frighten you. They got almost all of it. The pony's name, the tire swing, the way you take your coffee. Whoever built this didn't research you from the outside. They had the blueprints. That's what I keep circling back to, I said quietly. Everything she knew from inside this family. The private things, the buried things. Mitchell looked at me, and I watched him arrive at the same cold place I had reached in the dark, beside the dying fire. Then we're not hunting a stranger, he said. We're hunting someone who's already eaten at your table. Neither of us said the names. We did not have to. There were only so many people who had walked these halls and knelt at that empty grave and held the keys to my life. My wife, Caroline. The son she had brought into this house. The boy I had raised as my own, Trevor. A short list of people I was supposed to trust without thinking. And the cruelest arithmetic of all is that the shorter the list, the closer to home the knife. I won't move blind, I said. I want proof. The kind that holds up when this ends where you say it ends. Then we start with what she is before we touch who sent her. Mitchell pulled the notebook from his coat. First, DNA. Doesn't matter how perfect the face is. Blood doesn't lie any better than that dog of yours. I need a sample, clean, obtained legally. No chance, she suspects, or it's worthless to a prosecutor later. I almost smiled. I put a fresh hairbrush in the guest bathroom this morning, before I cooked breakfast. She's already used it. The chain is clean and untouched. Mitchell sat back and looked at me with something close to admiration. You set the DNA trap before you fed her poison pancakes. The pancakes only told me what I already knew. The brush tells a courtroom. You really did build all this thinking 4 moves ahead. The 4th move is where amateurs stop, I said. I learned that a long time ago. He told me what came next. He would run the sample through a forensic pathologist in Denver, a woman named Magdalena Flores, who owed him a favor and asked no questions she did not need answered. He would pull threads from the outside, surgical forms, shell accounts, anything connecting the woman in my house to the people who funded her. And I would do the harder thing. I would stay inside the trap, smiling, grieving, playing the broken and grateful father. Because the moment they sensed I was awake, they would vanish into the snow and try again from an angle I could not see. "Give me 72 hours, Mitchell said, standing, buttoning his coat. "I'll have a face for you. A real one. And Martin," he stopped at the door, "whoever's behind this planned for almost everything. People that careful keep a second knife. Watch your back, even inside your own house. Especially inside your own house." I walked him to the lower garage and watched his taillights disappear into the white, then went back up to play the part. His last words stayed with me, cold and certain. The list of people who knew my family well enough to do this was very, very short. And every name on it lived under my own roof. They came the next evening, the way vultures come, circling first and then descending all at once. Caroline called at noon to say she and Trevor simply had to see Anastasia with their own eyes, that they could not wait another day, that this was a miracle, and the family had to be whole again. Her voice trembled at all the right moments. 12 years of marriage had taught me the exact pitch of my wife's real distress, and this was not it. This was the pitch she used on bankers. I told her dinner was at 7. I cooked nothing this time. I let the staff handle it, because I wanted my hands and my eyes free. Caroline arrived in a cloud of perfume and pale cashmere. 58 years old and still beautiful in the deliberate, expensive way of a woman who has never once been caught off guard. She had come into my life 8 years after Anastasia's mother died, and I had let her, because the house was cold and I was lonely, and she was clever enough to make loneliness feel like love. She had brought her son with her, a watchful boy of 14 named Trevor, and I had raised him as my own, paid for his schools, handed him a vice presidency he had not earned. I had told myself for years that blood was not the only thing that made a family. I was about to learn how wrong a man can be about his own house. Caroline crossed the great room and stopped 6 feet from the woman wearing my daughter's face. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled. And then, precisely 2 seconds later, the tears fell. I had seen that 2-second delay 1,000 times across 1,000 tables. It is the pause it takes to retrieve an emotion you have rehearsed rather than one you are feeling. Real grief does not buffer. Real grief arrives before you are ready for it. Caroline's arrived exactly on schedule. "Anastasia," she breathed, and rushed forward, and folded the stranger into her arms. "Oh, sweetheart, I prayed for this. I never stopped praying." She had never prayed for anything in her life that did not have a balance sheet attached. Trevor came in behind her, unhurried, hands in the pockets of a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car. 38 now, with his mother's pale eyes and a stillness I had once mistaken for steadiness. He embraced the woman too, murmured the right words, called her his sister. But while his arms went through the motions, his eyes did something else entirely. They moved across the room. I watched him do it. I had watched men do it in boardrooms for 40 years. His gaze swept the mantel, the security camera in the corner, the old wall safe behind the landscape painting, the sight lines from the windows. He was not a brother overcome by a miracle. He was an auditor, confirming that the inventory matched the list, that the asset had been delivered intact, that the project was running on schedule. We sat down to dinner, and the performance deepened. Caroline asked careful, leading questions about the lost years, and each one was a door she held open for the imposter to walk through. "Tell us about the hospital, sweetheart. You must have been so frightened, all alone. No memory of who you were." The woman answered, and Caroline nodded along, supplying the emotion, smoothing every rough edge, the way a director coaches an actor through a scene she has already blocked out in her head. Trevor said little. He watched me more than he watched his returned sister, and twice I caught him checking his watch, that small, involuntary glance of a man waiting for a clock to run out. I played my part. I wept once, on cue. I held the imposter's hand across the table. I told them all how grateful I was, how I had given up hope, how God had finally answered an old man's prayers. I watched Caroline's shoulders ease and Trevor's jaw unclench as they decided, between the entree and the dessert, that the broken old father had swallowed the whole thing. And under the table, when no one could see, my own hands were perfectly steady, because somewhere between the soup and the second bottle of wine, I stopped wondering whether my wife and the boy I had raised were involved. And I knew, not suspected, knew. The 2-second tears, the auditor's eyes mapping my walls, the questions designed to feed the script, the way they finished the imposter's sentences when she faltered, because they had written those sentences themselves. These were not two grieving relatives welcoming home a lost girl. These were the people who had built her. After dessert, Caroline laid her hand over mine and looked at me with eyes that had practiced sincerity in mirrors. We need to take care of her now, Martin. Legally. Restore her properly. It's the right thing to do, she smiled. We'll handle all of it. You shouldn't have to worry about the details. No, I agreed gently. I shouldn't. They left near 11. Caroline kissed my cheek at the door, something she had not done in half a year. Trevor shook my hand, 2.5 seconds of dry, measured contact, and told me how good it was to have the family whole again. I stood on the porch in the cold and watched their taillights wind down the dark mountain road until the trees swallowed them. Then I went back inside and poured a drink I had no intention of finishing, and I sat in the dark with Sable's head against my knee, and I let myself feel, for exactly 1 minute, the full weight of what I had just confirmed. I had buried a wife. I had buried a daughter. And tonight I had watched the woman who shared my bed and the boy who called me father across that same table, calmly, lovingly, manage the theft of everything the dead had left behind. They thought they were closing the trap around me. They had no idea I was already counting the threads, one by one, and that every single one of them led straight back to the 2 people who had just kissed me goodnight. Finley Simpson came to the house the next morning carrying a small cedar box and the careful expression of a woman who has kept a secret too long. She had been my assistant for 25 years, since before the company had a second resort, since before Eleanor got sick. She had typed my letters and guarded my door and watched 2 coffins lowered into the ground beside me. And in all that time she had never once brought her own grief into my office. So when she stepped into my study that morning, snow still melting on her gray coat, and set the box on my desk without a word, I understood that whatever was inside it mattered more than anything she had ever handed me. Mrs. Blanchard gave me this, she said quietly. The first Mrs. Blanchard. Eleanor. 3 weeks before she passed. My throat went tight at the name. 12 years I had grieved my daughter, but Eleanor I had grieved longer. In the quiet way you grieve the person who knew you before you became hard.
She made me promise, Finley went on, that I'd keep it until the day you needed it. She said I would know when that day came.
Her eyes were bright.
I think it's come, Martin. I think it came the night that woman knocked on your door.
She set a small brass key beside the box, and then she left me alone, closing the study door with the same soft click she had been closing it with for 1/4 of a century. I sat there a long time before I could make myself open it. Some men are afraid of dying. I have never been one of them. What I was afraid of, sitting in the grey morning light with my dead wife's box in front of me, was that Eleanor had been right about something I had spent 12 years refusing to see. She had a way of being right that outlasted her. She had been right about the men I trusted and the deals I should have walked away from, and the loneliness that drove me into a second marriage I should never have made. I turned the brass key. Inside lay a few small things. A pressed columbine, the blue mountain flower Eleanor used to pick on our anniversary, a photograph of Anastasia at 6, gap-toothed, laughing on the old tire swing, and beneath them, folded twice, a letter in Eleanor's looping, elegant hand, the writing thinned and shaken by the illness that was already taking her. "Martin," it began, "if Finley has given you this, then either I've been gone a long while, or something has happened in our family that frightened her enough to act. I suspect it is both. I want to tell you what I could never make you hear while I was alive. You are a brilliant man and a generous one, but you are blind in one particular way, and it is the most dangerous blindness a rich man can have. You believe that because you love someone, they must love you back the same way. You believe loyalty can be bought with kindness and trust. It cannot. I have watched the woman you married. I have watched the boy she brought into our home. I will not accuse them of what I cannot prove, but I will tell you this, and I beg you to hear it now in a way you never would from my lips. Do not ever trust them completely. Not with Anastasia, not with the company, not with the things that cannot be replaced. Watch our daughter most of all. Caroline looks at her the way a buyer looks at a building she means to tear down. My hands were not steady anymore. There was more. And the last lines were the ones that stopped my breath entirely. I have a feeling, the kind a mother has and cannot explain, that the danger to Anastasia will not come the way you expect, and that when it comes, you will be told a story you want to believe. Promise me you will not stop looking. Whatever they tell you, whatever proof they bring you, if our girl is ever taken from us, promise me you will not stop looking until you have held her yourself." The letter ended there. No farewell. Just my dead wife's voice reaching across 12 years to lay a warning in my hands that I should have heeded the day the mountains swallowed our daughter. I set the page down on the desk and stared at it until the words stopped being words and became something heavier. She had known. Not the shape of it, not the surgery or the imposter or the boy's auditing eyes, but the heart of it. The thing I had been too proud and too lonely to see. Caroline looks at her the way a buyer looks at a building she means to tear down. Eleanor had watched it happening at her own dinner table and had carried the warning to her grave because she knew I would not listen while she lived. And then there were the other words, the ones that turned the cold thing in my chest into something close to terror. Promise me you will not stop looking until you have held her yourself. I had stopped. After 3 weeks of dogs and helicopters and an empty hole in the snow, I had let them tell me a story I wanted to believe, that the mountain had taken her, that there was nothing left to find. I had buried an empty coffin and built a museum out of her bedroom and called it grief. But Eleanor had begged me not to stop until I had held her. For the first time in 12 years, a question moved through me that I had never once allowed myself to ask. What if the story I had been told about that avalanche was exactly the kind of story my wife had warned me about? What if the reason they never found a body was not because the mountain had hidden it? What if there had never been a body to find? I picked up the pressed flower, blue and brittle and 12 years dead, and I understood that Eleanor had seen all of this coming from inside her own house. She had simply died before she could make me look. We went into the building at midnight, when the only lights left burning on the 12th floor were the red eyes of the security panels. Mitchell drove. I sat beside him with Eleanor's warning still folded in my coat pocket, and neither of us spoke much on the road down to Denver. The headquarters of Blanchard Alpine Resorts rose out of the financial district like something I had built to outlast me. Glass and steel, and my own name, lit white above the doors. I had walked into that building 10,000 mornings feeling like a man who had made something permanent. Tonight, I walked in feeling like a man about to read his own autopsy. I let us in with a key card that left no record, because I had built the system and I knew where its blind spots were. We took the stairs. On the 12th floor, I unlocked the small interior room behind my office, the one with no windows and a single console. The room where every keystroke in the company came to rest. 5 years ago, after an accountant quietly drained $2 million from a regional account before I caught him, I had this system installed. It logged everything. Every file opened, every login, every document downloaded, time-stamped to the second and stored where no one could alter it. The board approved it to stop theft from below. What the board never knew, what no one knew but me and now Mitchell, was that I had quietly extended it to log the executives too. All of them, including family. "Pull her up," Mitchell said, dragging a second chair to the console. "Caroline first." I typed my wife's name and narrowed the search the way you narrow a wound to find the bullet. Estate, trust, inheritance, shareholder agreements, succession. Then I pressed enter, and the screen filled with rows. There is a particular kind of pain reserved for a man who watches the security system he built to protect his family become the thing that proves his family betrayed him. I felt it then, cold and total. The way you feel an old injury in deep winter. 41, Mitchell said softly, reading the count at the bottom of the screen. 41 separate sessions. The first was dated 8 months earlier. The last was 3 weeks before the woman knocked on my door. In between lay a careful, patient map of everything I owned. The trust that controlled my voting shares, the succession clauses that named Anastasia as primary heir, the insurance policies, the dissolution terms, my will, opened and read and opened again. "Look at the times," Mitchell murmured, scrolling. "None of these are during business hours. 11 at night, 1 in the morning, 2. She was reading my estate while I slept 20 feet down the hall," I said. "And she wasn't just reading." Mitchell pointed to a session flagged with a longer duration. "Cursor tracking. She didn't print anything, because prints leave a paper trail, and she knew that. She held each document on the screen, paused, moved to the next. She was photographing them. With a phone, most likely. That's tradecraft, Martin. That's someone who understood your security well enough to work around it." "She watched me build that system," I said quietly. "She sat across from me at dinner the week the accountant was arrested and asked me how I'd caught him. I told her, God help me. I explained the whole thing to her like I was proud of it." We kept scrolling, and the pattern told its own story. The early sessions were long, an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours. Learning, absorbing the architecture of my wealth. The middle sessions shortened, 40 minutes, 30. She knew what she needed by then. And the final sessions were brief, 15 or 20 minutes. The quick, confirming glances of someone checking that nothing had changed before the plan went live. Then I ran Trevor's name, and the room got colder still. His sessions interlaced with hers like two hands working the same knot. Where Caroline read the financial structure, Trevor read the legal one. The trust mechanics, the exact conditions under which my voting control would transfer. The clause, buried deep, that would activate Anastasia's full inheritance on a specific date if she were proven alive and competent.
That clause had been accessed 9 times. Always by Trevor. Always after midnight.
They needed her alive, Mitchell said slowly, working it out aloud. Or alive enough. A dead daughter inherits nothing. But a daughter who walks back through the door, proven and restored, with the two of them controlling her, controlling her signature, her votes, her seat. That's the whole game. That's why they didn't just forge a will. They forged a person. I stared at the glowing rows of timestamps. 41 for Caroline, 29 for Trevor. 70 careful midnight thefts of the private architecture of my life. And I understood at last that this was not a moment of greed. This was a campaign. Months of patient, disciplined planning by 2 people who ate at my table, slept under my roof, and called me family, while they mapped the exact mechanism by which they would take everything the dead had left behind. Eleanor had warned me. Caroline looks at her the way a buyer looks at a building she means to tear down. She had been more right than even she knew. "This holds up," Mitchell said, and there was no comfort in his voice. Only the flat certainty of a man who had stood in federal courtrooms. Timestamps, access logs, duration. It proves intent. It proves premeditation. A prosecutor could build a wall out of this. "Then we save it," I said. "All of it. Mirrored, dated, somewhere they can't reach." He nodded and went to work. And I sat back in the dark of that windowless room, surrounded by the quiet hum of the machines that had just told me the truth. For 12 years I had believed the mountain took my daughter. Now I sat in the building I had named after myself and watched the evidence that 2 people I loved had spent months preparing to take her a second time, more completely than any Avalanche ever could, by erasing the real girl and replacing her with one they could own. 41 timestamps. My family had been planning this in the dark for the better part of a year, and they had no idea that the dark had been keeping a record the whole time. Doctor. Magdalena Flores called 4 days later and asked me to come to her office in person, and the careful flatness of her voice told me she had found something she would not say over a phone. Her lab sat on the 3rd floor of a forensic building near the medical center, all sterile white walls and the smell of antiseptic and old paper. She was a small, precise woman of 50, with reading glasses pushed up into iron-gray hair, the kind of person who had spent 2 decades delivering terrible news to families and had learned to do it without flinching. Mitchell came with me. We sat across the desk from her, and she folded her hands on a thin manila folder and looked at me the way doctors look at you when they are about to change your life. "Mr. Blanchard," she said, "the chain of custody on your sample was clean. The hairbrush was a smart choice. Whatever I tell you today would hold up in any courtroom in this country." She paused. "There are 2 findings. The first is simple. The second is not." "Tell me the first," I said. She slid the top page across the desk. Columns of genetic markers, probability calculations, a single line in bold at the bottom. "The woman living in your house," she said, "shares no genetic relationship with you. None. Not a daughter, not a cousin, not a distant relation of any kind. The probability of a biological connection is effectively 0. She is, genetically speaking, a complete stranger." I had known it since the moment her arms went around me without reaching for the ring. But knowing a thing in your body and seeing it printed in cold type beneath the forensic seal are 2 different kinds of certainty. And the second one landed harder than I expected. I set the page down. My hand was steady. I made sure of that. "That confirms what you came here believing," Flores said. "Now I have to tell you the part you did not come here for." She did not slide the second page across right away. She held it a moment, and something in her professional calm shifted just slightly, the way still water moves when something passes beneath it.
Mr. Carr asked me to run your genetic profile against the National Missing Persons and medical databases. Standard procedure when we suspect identity fraud. I flagged your markers and let them search across the federal networks and the regional hospital systems. She looked at me. I got a match. The room went very quiet. I could hear the hum of a refrigerator somewhere behind her. A match, I repeated. A partial profile, registered 14 months ago at a rural clinic in Lincoln County, Montana. She slid the second page across at last. A woman, mid-30s, treated for exposure and a fractured wrist after a winter she apparently spent off the grid. The intake notes list partial amnesia following an old traumatic injury, significant scarring along the left side, consistent with crush trauma and frostbite. She gave the clinic a first name and no last name. I was not breathing properly. The genetic comparison, Flores said gently, returned a parent-child match. 99.97%. Mr. Blanchard, the woman in that clinic is your biological daughter. The words went through me like cold water through a broken hull. For a moment, I could not make them connect to anything. 12 years of grief. 12 years of an empty grave and a museum of a bedroom, and snow falling on a slope where I believed my child had died. And a woman in a folder in Montana was turning all of it to vapor in a single sentence. She's alive, I said. My voice did not sound like mine. She was alive 14 months ago, Flores corrected carefully, because she was an honest woman and would not give me more than the evidence allowed. Treated and discharged. The clinic doesn't track patients after release, but she registered a stated residence in the area, and Mr. Carr believes she may still be there. Mitchell had already pulled out his phone. I have people I can reach in that part of Montana, he said quietly. Clinic administrators, a search and rescue outfit out of Libby. If she's been living rough up there, somebody knows her face. I sat with both pages side by side on the desk. On the left, the imposter in my house, a stranger, zero relation, a face bought and built. On the right, my real daughter, alive, scarred, hidden in a cold corner of Montana, while I mourned a ghost 400 miles away. Two truths laid out in forensic black and white. One of them was the cruelest lie ever told to me. The other was the answer to a prayer I had stopped praying 12 years ago. And the two truths together told a third thing, one that Flores was too careful to say, but that I understood the instant the pages lay next to each other. Caroline and Trevor had not built that imposter because they thought my daughter was dead. The estate clause Trevor accessed 9 times required Anastasia to be proven alive. They had built a fake daughter they could control precisely because the real one had survived. And a surviving daughter they could not control was the one thing standing between them and everything I owned, which meant they knew. Somewhere in their careful campaign, they had learned what I had just learned, that the mountain had not taken my girl. And rather than bring her home, they had chosen to keep her lost and to manufacture a daughter who would do as she was told. Eleanor's voice rose up out of 12 years of silence. Promise me you will not stop looking until you have held her yourself. Find her, I said to Mitchell. My voice had steadied into something hard and clear. Whatever it costs, find her before they realize we know she's alive. Because the moment they understand that, my real daughter becomes the only loose end they have left. Mitchell was already dialing. My daughter had been alive for 12 years, and someone who kissed me goodnight 3 days ago had made very sure I never found out.
Mitchell brought the file to my study 3 days later and set it on the desk between us like a thing he did not want to touch for too long.
"Now you know who she really is," he said. "And once you know, you can't unknow it. So I'll ask you once, do you want the whole thing? Or the kind version?" "The whole thing," I said. "I've had enough kind versions to last me 12 years. He opened the folder.
Her name was Malia Banks, 35 years old, born in Sacramento, a working actress who had never quite worked. The top page was a headshot from 6 years ago, before any of it, and I made myself study it the way a man studies a wound he has to clean. The bones were there, the wide-set eyes, the general shape of the face, a rough resemblance to my daughter. The kind a casting director might note in passing, nothing more. 60%, maybe, of the way to Anastasia. A starting canvas.
Below the headshot, her life unspooled in the flat language of public record. Minor theater, a few commercials, a pilot that never aired, eviction notices. A second job pouring drinks at a resort bar 2 valleys over from mine, the kind of place where rich men talk too loudly and the staff learn to disappear. 3 months behind on rent. The exact profile of a desperate person, which is to say, the exact profile of someone you can buy.
Caroline found her at the bar, Mitchell said. Surveillance stills put your wife there on a Tuesday night 2 years ago. Sat alone for 3 hours. Talked to Banks across the counter the whole time. Left her a card.
2 years, I said. 2 years.
He laid out the surgical records next, and this was the part that turned my stomach. Not because it was ugly, but because it was so meticulous. 6 procedures across 18 months, 3 different surgeons, none of them in Colorado, all paid in cash through accounts that led nowhere. He spread the before and after photographs across the desk in 2 columns, and I looked at my daughter being built out of a stranger, one operation at a time.
The nose, reshaped to match Anastasia's exactly. The jaw refined, the chin altered, cheek implants set to the precise width of my daughter's face. And then the details that made the hair rise on my arms. The small things. The things that told me whoever planned this had studied my child down to the cell. A dental procedure to chip the left front tooth at the same angle as a 9-year-old's bicycle fall. And a tattoo artist, of all things, hired to recreate a small comma-shaped birthmark below the right ear, inked so faithfully that I'd pressed my thumb to it in the doorway and felt 12 years fall away. $500,000, Mitchell said quietly. Conservative. Surgery, coaching, living expenses, the documents. $500,000. Martin. And the better part of 2 years. All of it spent building a copy of a daughter they already knew was alive somewhere in Montana. I sat with that. $500,000 to bury my real child a second time, more thoroughly than any Avalanche, by replacing her with a woman who would smile and sign and vote exactly as she was told. Whose money? I asked. Hers or his? Both. Funneled through a shell company Trevor set up the same month Caroline first walked into that bar. Reese Holdings. Cayman registration, Denver mailing address. The payments to the surgeons, the coaches, the apartment they kept Banks in during recovery, all of it runs through Reese. He tapped the page. His name's not on it directly. He's careful. But the formation documents were filed from his office IP, and your security logs put him reading the trust mechanics the same week he wired the first surgical deposit. He built the legal trap and the human one, side by side. I looked at the timeline he had drawn. 2 years of appointments and recoveries and coaching sessions laid out in a neat ascending line. And I thought about all the dinners in those 2 years, the holidays, The board meetings where Trevor had sat across from me with his careful eyes, and Caroline had touched my arm and asked, so gently, whether I had given any more thought to updating the estate. They had been building this the entire time, smiling at me over the turkey, while a surgeon in another state carved my daughter's face onto a stranger.
"There's one more thing," Mitchell said, and his tone changed, softened by a fraction. "The coaching records. They hired a behavioral coach, 6 months of sessions, to teach Banks how to be Anastasia. And the coach's notes are interesting. She wrote that the subject was, quote, exceptionally cooperative, but increasingly distressed. That Banks asked more than once what would happen to her when it was over."
And what did they tell her?
Nothing good, apparently. The notes stop. But people who get handed a new face and a new name and $500,000 worth of secrets, Martin, they learn to think about their own survival. A woman like that doesn't trust the people who built her. She knows exactly what she is to them. He met my eyes. She's a loose end wearing your daughter's face. And loose ends, the smart ones, they start keeping insurance. I looked down at the headshot again, at the desperate, ordinary woman they had melted down and recast into my grief. I had spent days hating her. Now, for the first time, I found myself wondering what she had been promised, and what she had figured out, and how frightened she must be sleeping in my dead daughter's bed, knowing the people who owned her would have no use for her once the will was signed. She was a weapon Caroline and Trevor had built, but a weapon is only loyal until it understands it is expendable. And something in Mitchell's voice told me Malia Banks had understood that a long time ago. The imposter had a routine, and routines are gifts to men like me. Every morning at 7, regardless of the cold, she pulled on Anastasia's old boots and took Sable out along the ridge trail for 40 minutes. The dog went because I told him to, and he hated every step of it, but it gave Mitchell and me a window. So on the 3rd morning, the moment her figure disappeared into the pines, Mitchell came up from the lower garage with a black case under his arm, and we went up to the guest suite together to find out what the woman living in my house was hiding. If Caroline planted surveillance to keep tabs on her own asset, Mitchell said, snapping on latex gloves, she'd want audio, at least. Quality control. People who spend $500,000 don't trust the product to behave on its own. He worked the room with a quiet, practiced thoroughness that I found almost soothing to watch. A radio frequency detector swept the outlets, the picture frames, the smoke detector, the lamp bases. The bed was made with a tightness that did not match a woman raised in this house. The clothes were folded with the precision of someone who owned very little and had learned to keep it neat. It was the room of a guest, not a daughter, and the longer I stood in it, the more it ached. The detective stayed silent through the closet and the bathroom. Then, near the nightstand, it began to chirp. Mitchell froze, adjusted the sensitivity, and traced the signal to the base of the reading lamp. He unscrewed it carefully and drew out a small black device, matte, smaller than a coin, wedged against the wiring. "There it is," he said. "Voice activated. Long battery. Professional grade, not something you buy at an electronics counter." He turned it under the light. This is how they kept their actress honest, listening to every word she said in this room, making sure she never broke character, never called the wrong person, never lost her nerve. He photographed it in place, then ran the device's serial number through his laptop. I watched the search spin, expecting a shell company, another dead end leading back to Reese Holdings and Trevor's careful hands. Instead, the result made him go very still.
he said. What? Purchase record. 11 months ago. Cash. At a shop in Boulder. He turned the screen toward me. Bought by Malia Banks, herself, under her own name. It took me a moment to understand. And when I did, something in the whole shape of the thing shifted. She's not being recorded, I said slowly. She's recording. She's recording herself. Mitchell sat back on his heels. And whoever comes into this room to talk to her, Martin, this isn't Caroline keeping tabs on her weapon. This is the weapon keeping tabs on the people holding it. He looked around the room with new eyes now, no longer hunting for what they had hidden in her, but for what she had hidden from them. She knows she's expendable. The coaching notes said she asked what happens when it's over. Nobody gave her an answer she liked, so she did the only thing a smart, frightened person can do. She started building a lifeboat. He found the rest of it in 20 minutes, taped inside the hollow back panel of the nightstand drawer. 3 small memory cards, no larger than my thumbnail. We took them down to the study, and Mitchell loaded the first one into his laptop, and a list of audio files filled the screen. Dozens of them, sorted by date going back nearly a year. He clicked one from late autumn. Caroline's voice came out of the speakers, crisp and unmistakable. The voice that had wished me good night 100 times. When he asks about the years you were gone, you pause first. 2 seconds, like it hurts to remember. Don't rush it. He's looking for hesitation, so give him hesitation in the right places, and he'll never look for it in the wrong ones. Then Malia's voice, smaller. And if he asks why I never called, you were afraid, Caroline said smoothly. You weren't ready. You wanted to come home whole, not broken. He'll forgive that. Grief makes people forgive anything. Mitchell skipped forward. Another date. And now Trevor's voice, lower, harder than his mother's. The amendment needs his signature by the 15th. After that, the transfer triggers, and it doesn't matter what he believes. He can contest it all he wants. By then, the shares are ours, and your job is done. And what happens to me then? Malia asked. And even through a cheap recorder, I could hear it. The fear under the question. The woman asking what becomes of a tool once it has served its purpose. There was a pause on the recording. A long one. And then Trevor said, in a voice with no warmth in it at all, "You'll be taken care of, one way or another." Mitchell stopped the playback. The study was very quiet. I had spent my anger on Malia Banks for days. The cinnamon. The ring she did not turn. The stranger eating breakfast in my daughter's chair. And now I sat listening to my own son, the boy I had raised, promised to take care of her one way or another. And I understood at last what she had understood months ago, that she was not a partner in this. She was disposable, a face to be melted down, used, and discarded the moment the ink dried. She had recorded every word of it, every coaching session, every cold instruction, every veiled threat. She had been documenting the people who built her since the very beginning, sitting in my dead daughter's bedroom, quietly stockpiling the only currency that might keep her alive when the curtain fell. The puppet had been recording her masters all along, and somewhere on those 3 small cards was my son and my wife, in their own voices, calmly describing how they meant to steal my daughter's life and dispose of the woman wearing her face. Save it, I said. All 3. Mirror everything. I looked at the frozen waveform on the screen, the shape of Trevor's voice made visible. And Mitchell. Whatever happens next, that woman in the guest room is worth more to us alive and talking than they ever meant her to be. They came for the signature on a Thursday, the way they did everything, dressed as kindness. Caroline called it a family meeting.
She arrived at 2 in the afternoon with Trevor at her side and a third man I had met only twice, a corporate attorney named Lennox McLean, who carried a leather portfolio the way a surgeon carries a tray. He was the kind of lawyer rich families keep on retainer to make ugly things look procedural. He shook my hand with exactly the right amount of grave warmth and told me what a blessing it was that Anastasia had come home. We sat in my study. The imposter was not there. They had left her upstairs, which told me everything about how they saw her. She was the product. This was the transaction.
"Dad," Caroline began,
and she had practiced the gentleness in her voice. "Now that Anastasia is back, we have to make things right for her, legally. She's been gone 12 years. Her status, her inheritance, her place in the company, none of it is current. It's only fair that we restore what she lost." "It's a simple matter of updating the trust," Trevor said. He had his auditor's calm on, the patient tone of a man explaining something inevitable. Reinstating her as primary heir, bringing the succession language back in line with reality. Lennox has prepared everything. McLean opened the portfolio and laid the documents across my desk with the smooth efficiency of a man who has done this to 100 grieving families. 40-some pages, I counted as he laid them out, because counting steadied me. "It's comprehensive," McLean said, his finger tracing the executive summary. "Page 7 restores Miss Blanchard's voting shares. Page 11 updates the trust distribution triggers. Page 19 handles the tax exposures so the estate isn't penalized for the, unusual circumstances." He smiled. "We've tried to anticipate every contingency." I picked up page 7 and read it slowly. And I will admit, the craftsmanship was beautiful. If I had not known the truth, if I genuinely believed the woman upstairs was my child, this would have looked like nothing more than a loving family doing right by a daughter the world had given back. The language was warm, the structure was generous, and buried inside that generosity, clause by careful clause, was the machinery that would hand control of everything I had built to the two people sitting across from me. Because the trust, once amended, named Anastasia as primary heir. And Anastasia, the one upstairs eating cinnamon and answering to a script, would do exactly as Caroline and Trevor told her. Her votes were their votes. Her signature was their signature. They were not restoring my daughter. They were installing a remote control where my daughter used to be. Page 28 is the timeline, McLean continued. Upon execution, the amendments take immediate effect. The share transfers complete within 90 days. We can have a mobile notary here this afternoon, if you're comfortable. He produced a heavy black fountain pen and laid it beside 3 signature pages he had separated from the stack. 40 pages of legal architecture, distilled down to 3 quiet lines where an old man's hand would end his own reign. Caroline reached across and laid her fingers over mine. "I know it's a lot, Martin, but it's the right thing. Let us take care of the details. You've carried this family long enough." I looked at her hand on mine, the wedding ring I had put there 9 years ago catching the light, and I felt the full, cold weight of what they were. Not desperate, not even cruel in any hot and human way. They were patient. They had buried my real daughter alive in Montana, built a false one out of a frightened actress, mapped my estate at midnight for the better part of a year. And now they sat in my study with a fountain pen and a gentle voice, asking me to sign away the last of it, while they called it love. I let my hand tremble under hers, just slightly. I let my eyes fill. "It's my whole life on these pages," I said, and I made my voice old and uncertain, the voice they needed to hear.
40 years. I need to read it myself. Properly. You understand?
Of course, Caroline said at once, and I caught the flicker of triumph she could not quite hide, the small relaxation of a predator that believes the prey has stopped running.
Take all the time you need.
A week, I said. Let an old man read his own undoing slowly. Absolutely, McLean said, gathering the pages back into the portfolio with professional ease. This is far too important to rush. They stood. There were handshakes, and a kiss on my cheek from Caroline, and from Trevor a measured grip and a quiet, "Good to have the family whole again." Dad, the word Dad landing in my chest like a stone, because I had taught that boy to call me that, and meant it. I walked them to the door. I watched their cars wind down the mountain, and then I went back to my study and stood at the window for a long time, perfectly still, feeling something I had not felt in all the years of corporate warfare that built this house. Not fear, not anger. The strange, level calm of a man who is not reacting to his opponent's move, because he made his own move long ago, and has simply been waiting for this exact moment to arrive. 40 pages. Trevor and his lawyer had spent months drafting the instrument that would take everything from me. They had no idea I had already built mine. They had no idea that while they mapped my estate at midnight, I had quietly moved it somewhere their 40 pages could never reach. And in 7 days, when they came back for the signature, they were going to learn that the trap they thought they were closing had been standing open around them the entire time. The morning after they brought me the pen, I drove down to Denver alone and walked into a law office that had nothing to do with Lennox McLean or anyone my family had ever met. I told no one. I put nothing on my calendar. I paid the consultation fee in cash. 60 miles of mountain highway gave me time to think, and I spent it thinking not about the 40 pages on my desk, but about a decision I had made 9 months earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday, for a reason I could not have fully explained at the time. The firm of Doherty and Stone occupied a quiet floor in a building that did not advertise. Parker Doherty had drafted instruments for old Colorado families for 30 years, the kind of work done by referral and remembered by no one. He met me in a conference room with a single folder already waiting on the table. "Mr. Blanchard," he said, "you asked to review the trust before the end of the month. Your timing, I take it, has become urgent." "My daughter came home last week," I said. Except she didn't. And the people who sent her brought me an amendment yesterday afternoon. His eyebrows rose a fraction. Then this conversation is exactly 9 months overdue, and exactly on time. Sit down. He opened the folder, and there it was. The thing I had built before I knew I would need it. 9 months ago, I'd begun to feel something I could not name. Small things. Caroline asking, twice in 1 month, whether I had thought about updating my will. Trevor lingering after board meetings with questions about the trust mechanics that a vice president had no reason to ask. Finley mentioning, almost in passing, that Mrs. Blanchard had been in the building late, alone, more than once. None of it was proof. None of it was even an accusation. It was just a cold draft moving through a house that was supposed to be warm. And I had learned long ago to trust a cold draft. So I had come here, quietly, and done the one thing a man in my position can do to protect what matters from the people closest to him. I had created an irrevocable trust. "Walk me through it again," I said. "All of it." As if I were the one trying to break it. Doherty only smiled. "Then you'll be disappointed. Because you can't." He turned the pages as he spoke. 51% of the voting shares of Blanchard Alpine Resorts, the controlling interest, transferred irrevocably into this trust on the 1st of last March. You are no longer the legal owner of that controlling block. You gave it away. Permanently. To whom? To the trust, administered by your designated trustee. He tapped a name on the page. Jeremiah Weiss, your independent board member, sole trustee, with absolute discretion. No family member can override him, replace him, or compel him. They cannot vote those shares. They cannot transfer them. They cannot even contest the existence of this trust while corporate litigation is pending or reasonably anticipated. And anticipated, I said, is a word I can trigger myself. With a sworn affidavit. Yes. The moment you state, under oath, that you reasonably anticipate a dispute, the trust locks. Completely. Mr. Weiss controls the company, and no instrument signed after the 1st of March can touch it. He looked at me over his glasses, including any amendment your family asks you to sign this week. You could sign their 40 pages 100 times. It would be legally meaningless. The controlling shares are no longer yours to give. I sat with that, and the relief of it was so large, I had to keep my face still to contain it. Read me the execution date, I said, out loud. I wanted to hear it in the room. March 1st, Doherty said. Notarized, witnessed, filed with the county the following morning. March 1st. 9 months before a woman in a stolen face knocked on my door. The trap had been standing open, armed and silent, the entire time Caroline mapped my estate at midnight, and Trevor wired money to surgeons, and the two of them sat across my dinner table feeding lines to their actress. Everything they had built, the $500,000, the 2 years, the perfect forged daughter, all of it had been aimed at a prize I had quietly moved beyond their reach before they ever started. They had been racing toward a finish line, I said, that stopped existing 9 months ago. They have, Doherty agreed. And they don't know it. That was the part that mattered. They didn't know. Which meant I still held the one thing of real value in any negotiation. The thing I had spent 40 years learning to protect above all else. I knew something they didn't. And I knew it about a fight they thought they were winning. I told Doherty what I needed. The certified copies. The affidavit ready to sign. And one more thing. A date. Far enough out to gather everything and bring my real daughter home. Close enough that Caroline and Trevor would not lose patience and do something desperate. The annual shareholders meeting, 6 weeks away. Full board. Every name at the table. You mean to do it in front of the company? Doherty said. I mean to do it in front of everyone, I said. The DNA, the recordings, the midnight logs, the trust, all of it, in one room, in 1 hour. While they sit there believing they've already won. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he realizes he is no longer drafting documents, but loading a weapon. I drove back up the mountain as the sun went down behind the peaks, and for the first time since the knock at midnight, I felt the ground steady under me. The 40 pages on my desk were not a threat anymore. They were evidence. The instrument my family had built to destroy me was going to become, on a day of my choosing, the rope they hanged themselves with. All that remained was to gather the rest of it, to put Jeremiah Weiss on notice, to get the affidavit signed, and to do the one thing in all of this that was not strategy, the one thing that mattered more than the company or the shares, or the slow, cold justice waiting 6 weeks away. I had to go to Montana and bring my daughter home and let them walk into that room and find her waiting. She knocked on my study door at 11:30, 3 soft taps, and I knew before I opened it that the curtain was about to come down on her own terms. I had been sitting with the 40 pages spread across my desk, not reading them, just looking at them the way you look at a snare you have already disarmed. When the knock came, I called for her to enter, and Malia Banks stepped into the room wearing her own face for the first time since she had arrived. I do not mean that literally. The surgery was still there. The eyes and the jaw and the inked comma below her ear. But the performance was gone. The careful, wounded softness she wore at breakfast had fallen away, and what stood in my doorway was simply a tired, frightened woman who had run out of road. "You know I'm not her," she said. No preamble, no tears. "And I know you know. We've been doing this dance for 2 weeks, Mr. Blanchard, and I'm done dancing. Sit down," I said. "I'd rather stand." "Sit down," I said again, gently this time. "If we're going to do this, we do it like 2 people, not like a Mark and a Con." She sat in a chair across from my desk, the same chair Caroline had used to lay her hand over mine. She folded her hands in her lap to keep them still. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since the doorway. The first night. You didn't turn the ring." She closed her eyes. "The ring? They never told me about a ring." A short, broken laugh. "They gave me 300 pages on her. Her voice, her walk, the dog, the pony, the way she chipped her tooth. And they missed a ring?" She shook her head. "I knew it the second I felt you go still. I felt, you know." She reached into her coat and drew out a small USB drive, set it on the desk, and slid it across to me with one finger. "Everything," she said. Copies of the cards from the lamp, the coaching sessions, the payment schedules, the surgery consults. Every word Caroline and Trevor ever said to me in that room. I've been recording them since before the first operation. Because I'm not stupid, and I knew exactly what I was to them the day they offered me $500,000 to disappear into a dead girl. I picked up the drive. It was smaller than my thumb, and it held enough to send the 2 people I had called family to a federal prison. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. "Because I want out, and they won't let me out alive." She said it flatly, without drama, the way you state a fact about the weather. "I figured it out months ago. I'm not the partner. I'm the loose end, the face that knows everything. The second Trevor doesn't need me, I'm a liability with a pulse." She met my eyes. "I want protection, a cooperation deal, immunity, reduced charges, whatever your lawyers can build. In exchange, I'll testify to all of it. I'll stand in any courtroom you put me in and tell the truth. I just want to walk out of this with my life. That's the whole ask." I looked at her for a long moment. This desperate woman they had melted down and recast into my grief. And I understood something that surprised me. Sitting across from a con artist at midnight, listening to her confess, I was looking at the most honest person who had been in my house in 2 weeks. "Tell me one thing first," I said. "When you took the job, did you know my real daughter was alive?" She flinched. It was the first time her composure cracked. "Not at first," she said quietly. "At first, they told me she died on a mountain 12 years ago. That this was about giving a grieving father closure and keeping the company stable. I almost believed it." She swallowed. "Then, about a year in, I overheard them. Trevor was on the phone with someone, arguing about money, payments to keep somebody quiet, somebody up north. And he said a name. He said, as long as nobody goes looking in Montana, we're fine." The room seemed to tighten around me. "There's more," she said, and now her voice dropped, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "I don't know what it means.
But Trevor was drinking one night, near the end, and he got cold the way he gets cold. And he said something I've never been able to forget. She looked at her hands. He said the hardest part was never the surgery, or the money, or any of it. He said the hardest part was 12 years ago, on the mountain. He said, "You have no idea what it costs to walk away and leave someone in the snow."
The fire popped in the grate. Outside, the wind moved through the pines.
"He was the last one with her," Malia whispered. "That day, the day of the avalanche. He told me himself, like it was a thing he was proud of surviving. He said he was the last person to see Anastasia before the mountain took her."
I sat very still. 12 years I had carried the story they handed me. An avalanche, a tragedy, a girl who went up the slope alone and never came down, and a mountain too vast and too cruel to ever give back her body. I had built a museum out of that story. I had buried an empty coffin to it, and now a frightened woman in a stolen face was telling me, at midnight, that my son, the boy I had raised, had been standing beside my daughter in the snow on the day she disappeared, and had walked away. She handed me the rope, I would think later, to hang the people I once called family. But in that moment, I did not think anything so clean. In that moment, I only felt the floor of a 12-year-old grief shift beneath me, and a far darker question rise up through the crack. The avalanche had taken my daughter, but what if the avalanche had had help? Mitchell called at 6 the next morning, before the sun had cleared the ridge, and the first thing he said was, "Are you sitting down, Martin? Because you need to be." I was standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, watching the gray light come up over the slope where I had believed for 12 years my daughter died. I sat, after what the bankswoman told you last night. I pulled the old file, Mitchell said. The original incident report from the avalanche. I still have friends in the right places. And a sheriff's office in a small county doesn't bury things as deep as a corporation does. I've been up all night with it. Martin, the story you were told 12 years ago is not the story in these records. Tell me, I said. My voice came out level. I do not know how. You were told she went up the back face of Maroon Peak alone. That's what the press said. That's what the family said. That's what's carved on the empty stone you put in the ground. He paused. She didn't go alone. The trailhead register has 2 names that morning, hers and Trevor's. He signed in right below her, 7 minutes apart. I set the coffee down very carefully, because my hand had stopped being reliable. There's a witness statement in the file that never made it into anything public, Mitchell went on. A backcountry guide named Holt, retired now, lives outside Carbondale. He was on an adjacent slope that morning. He told the responding deputy he saw 2 figures high on the face before the slide came down. 2, not 1. And he said something the deputy wrote down and then, as far as I can tell, nobody ever followed up on. He said the slide didn't start natural. He said he heard a crack he knew, the kind that doesn't come from snow settling, the kind that comes from a charge. The kitchen was very quiet. Sable lifted his head from his bed by the cold hearth and looked at me. A charge, I repeated. Ski Patrol uses small explosive charges to trigger controlled slides. Clear, unstable snow before it can come down on its own. They're not hard to get if you work in this industry. And your son spent 2 summers on the patrol crew at your own resort when he was in college. He knew exactly how they work. He knew where they're stored. Mitchell's voice was flat and careful, the voice of a man laying facts in a row and letting them speak. Holt's statement was taken the day of the accident. 3 days later, it was amended.
The line about the crack and the second figure was struck. The deputy who took it transferred to another county that same month, to a position that paid considerably more than a rural deputy makes. The transfer was, the records say, facilitated by a private donor.
Reese Holdings, I said. Reese Holdings didn't exist 12 years ago. But the donor's attorney of record, Mitchell said quietly, was a young associate at a Denver firm, just starting out. Lennox McLean. I closed my eyes. For 12 years I had believed I lost my daughter to a mountain, to weather and bad luck and the indifferent cruelty of snow. I had made my peace, as much as a man can, with the idea that nature took her, that there was no one to blame, that grief had no address to send its rage to. I had stood at that empty grave and told myself the worst thing that could happen to my family had already happened, and that it had no villain in it. And now I sat in my kitchen at dawn and understood that the worst thing had been done on purpose. That the boy I raised, the boy who called me Dad, had walked up that slope 7 minutes behind my daughter, with the knowledge of a man who'd worked the patrol and had come back down alone. That when the real Anastasia, against every impossible odd, had survived the snow he buried her under and crawled out broken and amnesiac into a Montana wilderness, they had not been relieved. They had spent 12 years and $500,000 making sure she stayed lost, and building a false daughter to take the seat the true one would never be allowed to claim. They had not stolen her future. They had tried to murder her past, and when the past refused to die, they had buried it a second time with paperwork and surgery and a frightened woman in a stolen face. "Martin," Mitchell said, gentler now. "You still there?" He was 26, I said. The words did not feel like mine. I had just named Anastasia in the succession, over him, 3 weeks before. I remember the dinner. I remember thinking he took it well. He took it the way a man takes a thing he's already decided to fix, Mitchell said. "I'm sorry. There's no soft way to carry this." I looked out at the slope, white and innocent in the morning light, and for the first time in all of it, I felt the cold, strategic calm crack down the middle, and something hotter move through underneath. Not for the company, not for the shares. For a girl in an orange jacket who had trusted the brother walking behind her, and for a mother who had begged me from her deathbed not to stop looking, and whose warning I had folded into a drawer for 12 years. "Get me everything Holt will say on the record," I said when I could speak again. "The trailhead register, the original statement before they cut it, the deputy's transfer, the donor, McLean's name on it, all of it. Certified, sealed, ready for the room. You'll have it before the shareholders' meeting." "No," I said. "Before that, I'm going to Montana. I'm going to bring her home." I stood, and the calm came back over the heat, harder than before, tempered now in a way it had never been. "And then I'm going to put my son in a room with the sister he left in the snow, and let him watch her walk in alive." Rowan Patel found her in a valley north of Libby, in a one-room cabin at the end of a logging road, and he called me at 4 a.m. to say only this: "She's here. She's real. And Mr. Blanchard, she doesn't know yet that anyone is coming." I flew into Kalispell the next day, and Patel drove me the rest of the way in a battered truck with chains on the tires. He was a lean, quiet man who ran a search and rescue outfit out of Lincoln County and had spent 15 years pulling people off mountains, alive and otherwise. Mitchell had hired him to ask careful questions in the kind of town where strangers asking questions get noticed.
It had taken him 11 days.
She goes by Anna, Patel said as we climbed into the snow. No last name. Folks up here don't push. She came in about a year and a half ago. Half frozen, busted wrist. The clinic patched her up. She's been doing odd work since. Splitting wood, helping at the feed store. People like her say she's gentle. Say she gets a far-off look sometimes. Like she's listening for something she can't quite hear.
Did you tell her anything? Not a word. That's yours to do. He glanced at me. But I'll say this. I've reunited a lot of families. It doesn't always go the way the movies tell you. Sometimes the person you're looking for got good at being lost. Go easy.
The cabin sat in a clearing with smoke rising thin from the chimney. Patel stayed in the truck. I walked the last 100 yards alone through snow that came over my boots, and my heart was doing something it had not done in 40 years of boardrooms and hostile takeovers. It was afraid.
I knocked. The door opened. And there she was.
Not the polished, perfect copy who had eaten cinnamon in my kitchen. This was a woman worn down to something essential. Thinner, older than her years. Her hair was longer and unevenly cut, her hands rough from work. And down the left side of her jaw and neck ran a wide scar, jagged and old. Pink and silver where the snow and the ice, and whatever the mountain did to her, had healed wrong. But the eyes were Eleanor's eyes. The chip in the tooth was real, earned at 9 on a bicycle, not carved by a surgeon. And the comma below her ear was a birthmark, not an ink. She looked at me with no recognition at all. And that was the cruelest moment of the whole 12 years.
Can I help you?
She said. Anna, I said, because Patel had told me to use the name she knew. My name is Martin. I've come a long way to find you. I think I knew you. Before. Something moved behind her eyes. Not memory, exactly. More like the shadow a memory throws. A lot of people think they know me, she said carefully. I'm sorry. I don't remember much from before. There was an accident on a mountain, I said. 12 years ago. Her hand went to the scar on her jaw, unconsciously. The way you touch a thing that aches when the weather turns. You know about the mountain, she said. It was almost a whisper. I did not push. I'd spent my whole life pushing, and I knew, somehow, that this was the one room in which it would cost me everything. So I just stood in the cold doorway and told her, quietly, the smallest true things. That I had lost a daughter to an avalanche. That her name was Anastasia. That she had gray eyes like her mother's and a chip in her tooth from a bicycle and a small mark below her ear shaped like a comma. That for 12 years I had believed the snow took her, and that 4 days ago I had learned it had not. She listened, and her breathing changed, and partway through she reached out and gripped the doorframe to steady herself. I have dreams, she said when I finished. Her voice had gone thin. About a house with a big stone fireplace, and a dog, a shepherd, dark face, and a swing behind a cabin. I always thought I made them up. Tears were running now, and she did not seem to notice them. There's a man in the dreams, older, kind. He wears 2 rings on one hand. I lifted my left hand, slowly, so she could see. Her mother's slim band pressed against my own. And then it happened. The thing no surgeon could fake and no script could teach. The thing I had been waiting 12 years to feel without knowing I was waiting. She reached out, with a hand that was shaking, and she took my fingers, and she turned the rings. Once, twice, a third time. Slow and absent and gentle. A reflex from a 7-year-old girl in a room full of grown men in black suits. A private thing her body remembered
even when her mind could not. 3 turns of the ring. I made a sound I had never made before and have not made since. I do not have a word for it. And my daughter, my real daughter, looked up at me with 12 years of fog tearing open behind her eyes, and she said the only word that mattered, "Dad." I held her in the doorway of that cabin while the snow came down around us. And this time the arms that came around me were the right arms, and the hands found my rings without being told, and I knew all the way down to the bottom of me that the mountain had finally given her back. We talked for hours by her small fire. The memories came in pieces, jagged and out of order. She remembered going up the slope. She remembered being cold. And she remembered, dim and terrible, a figure beside her in the white, and then a sound, and then nothing for a very long time. "There was someone with me," she said, frowning into the flames, reaching for something just out of her grasp. "I keep almost seeing his face." "You don't have to see it yet," I said, and I took her hand. "I know whose face it is. And soon, sweetheart, he's going to see yours." After 12 years, my real daughter had come home. And there was one room left in the world where she still needed to be seen. The shareholders' meeting room on the 40th floor of Blanchard Alpine Resorts had been built to intimidate. I had designed it that way myself decades ago. Floor-to-ceiling glass, a view of the Rockies sharp enough to cut, and a long table of black walnut, polished until it threw back the faces of everyone seated around it. On the morning of the 12th, every chair was full. Caroline sat at my right hand, wearing the gray cashmere she saved for funerals and victories. She had not yet decided which this was. Trevor sat beside her, a leather portfolio squared precisely with the table's edge, the 40-page amendment inside it like a loaded thing. Across from them, Malia sat in the chair we had agreed on, her hands folded, her face arranged into the careful blankness of someone who knew this was the last performance she would ever give. Jeremiah Weiss called the meeting to order. The independent directors shuffled their papers. Lennox McLean, the family's attorney, leaned back with the ease of a man who believed the outcome was already notarized. "Before we vote on the proposed amendment," I said, "I'd like to share some findings." Caroline's hand found my forearm. "Martin, this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place." I nodded to Magdalena Flores, seated at the far end. She rose and connected her tablet to the screen behind me. The first slide was a DNA report. I let the room read it before I spoke. "This is a comparative analysis of the woman who has been living in my home. The woman presented to all of you as my daughter Anastasia. The probability of biological relation to me is 0. Not low, 0. The room did not gasp. Wealthy rooms never gasp. They go silent in a way that costs more. Trevor's jaw worked. "That report could be fabricated. Anyone with..." "It could," I agreed. "Which is why there's a second one." The slide changed. A second profile. A name beside it. A woman in Lincoln County, Montana. 99.97% parent-child match. My daughter has been alive for 12 years. Now Caroline's composure cracked at the hinge. I watched it happen, the 2-second tells I had catalogued months ago. The delayed grief. The eyes that calculated before they wept. This time there was no time to calculate. "Play it," I said to Malia. She set a small recorder on the table and pressed it without looking up. Caroline's voice filled the room first, coaching, rehearsing a daughter's lines. Then Trevor's, flat and cold, setting a deadline, naming the amendment, naming the money. Then a sentence that turned the air to ice. "Make sure no one ever looks in Montana." Lennox McLean set down his pen very quietly, the way a man does when he realizes he is no longer the lawyer in the room,
but a defendant in waiting.
"You buried me alive," Malia said, her voice steady for the first time in months. "All of you. I just decided to stop being your shovel."
Trevor stood so fast, his chair struck the glass behind him. This is insane. He's a grieving old man. He's been manipulated. I move that we— The door at the end of the room opened. She came in slowly, a coat over her shoulders. A scar at her hairline the doctors in Montana had never explained to her. 12 years older than the photograph on my desk. Thinner, weathered by a life she had built without a name. But the chipped front tooth was the same. The comma-shaped birthmark at her wrist was the same. And when she stopped at the head of the table and looked at the man who had stood, her hand rose to her own hand and turned a ring that wasn't there 3 times. The old habit. The thing no imposter had ever known to do.
"Trevor," Anastasia said, "you were on the mountain."
The room understood everything in the space of that sentence. The real daughter. The avalanche that had never been an accident. The brother who had stood at a trailhead register 12 years ago and signed his name beside hers. Trevor's face did something I had never seen it do in 38 years of raising him as my own. It came apart. Not into grief. Into the raw, cornered fury of an animal that finally sees the shape of the trap it has been standing in. "She's dead," he said. "She's been dead for 12 years. I watched." He stopped. The whole table heard the unfinished end of that sentence. I watched. Caroline made a sound then. Low. The sound of a mother watching her son hand the prosecution its case in 4 words. She reached for him. He pulled away. "The 51% controlling stake," I said quietly. To the directors, to the lawyers, to the city of witnesses I had assembled, was placed in an irrevocable trust 9 months ago. There is no amendment to vote on. There never was. You came here to take what was already gone. I looked at my daughter, my real daughter, standing where she belonged at last. "Welcome home, Anna," I said. And for the first time in 12 years, I let the room see an old man cry. They were waiting in the lobby. I had not told Caroline or Trevor that the elevators down from the 40th floor opened onto a marble atrium where 4 agents in plain coats had been standing since 8 that morning. Mitchell had arranged it the way he arranged everything, quietly, completely, with the patience of a man who had spent 30 years learning that the last 10 feet of any case are the ones people forget to plan. Trevor saw them first. I watched his stride break, that confident auditor's walk faltering on the polished stone. And for a moment, I thought he might run. There was nowhere to run. The exits had been covered. The garage had been covered. A man can buy a great many things with another family's money, but he cannot buy back the floor of an atrium once it is full of people who have come for him. "Trevor Mullins," the lead agent said. "You're under arrest for the attempted murder of Anastasia Blanchard 12 years ago, and for conspiracy to commit fraud." He did not resist. That surprised me. I had braced for noise, for the animal fury I'd seen come apart in the boardroom. But what I got instead was silence. The silence of a man hearing, finally, the true weight of a thing he had spent 12 years pretending was light. They turned him toward the glass. His reflection looked back at him, and I wondered if he saw what I saw. Not a stranger, but the boy I had taught to ski on the bunny slope at Aspen, the boy whose homework I had checked, the boy I had loved as my own, and never once in 38 years suspected of being capable of this. Caroline did not go quietly. "Martin!" She caught my sleeve as the second agent approached her. Her voice had dropped all its cashmere now. "Martin, I did it for us, for the family. He's my son. What was I supposed to do? Let him have nothing? Let the company go to a girl who—" "She was my daughter," I said. She was mine too, in every way that... No. I removed her hand from my sleeve, gently, the way you set down something that is no longer yours to hold. You buried her on a mountain, and you raised the man who pushed her there. There is nothing of mine in you anymore. She had no answer. For the first time in the years I had known her, Caroline Bowen had no answer at all. They read her rights. She wept, and I could not tell, even then, whether the tears were grief or arithmetic. And I understood that I would never know, and that I no longer needed to. Malia Banks they took separately and softly. She had her own attorney now, the immunity arrangement Mitchell had negotiated in exchange for the recordings and her testimony. As they walked her past me, she stopped. "I spent 2 years wearing your daughter's face," she said. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix it." "No," I said. "But you handed me the thing that did. That counts for something." She nodded, and something in her shoulders eased, and she went out into a future that would at least be her own. Lennox McLean was disbarred within the month. The deputy who had buried the Avalanche report 12 years ago. The donor who had paid for his transfer. Mitchell's file unspooled them all in the weeks that followed, each thread pulling another loose, until the whole quiet architecture of the cover-up lay exposed in the daylight it had hidden from for over a decade. I stayed in the atrium long after the cars had gone. The morning light came down through the glass and lay across the marble in long gold bars. Somewhere above me, on the 40th floor, the trust held, the company held, the thing I had built held. None of it felt like victory. Justice, I was learning, is not the same as triumph. It is only the closing of a wound that should never have been opened. The setting of a bone that healed wrong and had to be broken again to heal true. Anastasia found me there. She had been giving her own statement, hours of it, 12 years of fragments laid out for strangers with recorders. She looked exhausted in the particular way of someone who has finally set down a weight they didn't know they were carrying. "It's done," she said. She didn't make it a question. "It's done." She stood beside me, and we watched the light together, the two of us, the way we used to watch the snow come down over Maroon Peak when she was small and the world was still whole. "I don't forgive them," she said quietly. "I don't think I can. Is that wrong?" I thought of all the years I had told myself that forgiveness was strength, that a bigger man let things go. I thought of the mountain and the explosive charge, and the daughter who had walked out of the wilderness with no name and a scar she couldn't explain. "No," I said. "Some things aren't ours to forgive. They're only ours to survive. And you survived. That's the part that matters." She put her head on my shoulder. She was 34 years old, and for one moment she was 6 again, and I was a father again. And the long, dark hallway of those 12 years finally had a door at the end of it. Outside, the snow began to fall. Spring came late to the Rockies that year, the way it always does after a hard winter. The snow on Maroon Peak held until May, then let go all at once, and the rivers ran high and brown and loud, with everything the mountains had been keeping. We held the first ceremony of the Eleanor Blanchard Foundation on a Tuesday in June, on a meadow below the resort where the columbine grew wild. I had named it for my first wife Anastasia's mother because she had written me a letter 12 years too early and 12 years too true, telling me to keep looking, telling me not to trust the easy story. I had not listened to her in time. I would spend whatever years I had left listening now. The foundation searches for the missing, not the ones whose faces fill the news for a week and then fade, but the quiet ones,
The ones the world decides to stop looking for because it is easier, because the file is old, because there is no body, and so there is assumed to be no hope. We fund the searches that the official ones abandon. We pay for the dogs and the divers and the men like Rowan Patel who do not know how to stop. In the first year alone, we brought 4 people home. 2 of them were alive.
Anastasia runs it. I had offered her the company, the controlling stake, the towers, the empire I had spent a lifetime building, and she had laughed, not unkindly, and told me she had spent 12 years learning to live with almost nothing, and that she had no use for almost everything. So Jeremiah Weiss runs the company under the trust, and runs it well. And my daughter spends her days finding the people the world gave up on, because she knows, better than anyone alive, what it is to be one of them. Trevor took a plea. 22 years. I went to the sentencing and I sat in the back and I did not speak to him. And he did not look at me. And when it was over, I drove home through the mountains and I did not cry. And I understood that some doors, once they close, are meant to stay closed. Caroline got 11 years for the fraud and the conspiracy. The Avalanche charges against her never quite held. She had not been on the mountain, and so she will be free again someday, an old woman in a world that has moved on without her. I've made my peace with that. Peace, I've learned, is not the same as forgiveness. It is only the decision to stop letting a thing live rent-free in the rooms of your heart. Malia Banks sends a card every Christmas. She is acting again, small parts, under her own name at last. I keep the cards in the cedar box where Eleanor's letter used to be, before I framed it and hung it where I would see it every morning. Sable, my old dog, the one who knew the imposter for a liar before I let myself know it, died in March. Warm by the fire, with his head on Anastasia's knee. He had waited, I think, to see her come home. Animals understand things we spend our whole lives trying to argue ourselves out of. I am 67 years old. I built a fortune on the side of a mountain, and I nearly lost the only thing that fortune was ever for, because I believed the comfortable lie instead of the painful question. A stranger knocked on my door in a blizzard wearing my daughter's face, and she very nearly walked off with my whole life. And the only reason she didn't is that I had learned, somewhere in all those years of reading rooms and reading people, to trust the small, wrong thing over the large, right one. A ring that wasn't turned 3 times. A dog that backed away. A pancake eaten without a flinch. The truth almost always arrives in the details we are most tempted to ignore. If I could tell you one thing, you, sitting wherever you are, listening to an old man's story, it would be this. The people who love you are not always the people who share your name. And the people who share your name are not always the people who love you. Pay attention. Watch what they do when they think the watching is over. The face can be rebuilt. The voice can be coached. The story can be rehearsed for 2 years in a rented room. But love leaves fingerprints. And so does its absence. And if you are brave enough to look, really look, you will always, in the end, be able to tell the difference. My daughter came back to me. Not because I deserved it, because I refused, finally, to stop looking. The mountain took her once. And then, 12 years later, on a Tuesday in June with the columbine in bloom, the mountain gave her back. Now I want to hear from you. If a stranger knocked on your door wearing the face of someone you'd lost, would you have known? What would have given them away? And the harder question, the one I still ask myself in the quiet hours. Would you have wanted to know? Or would you have let yourself believe the beautiful lie? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that it is never, ever too late to stop looking.